Gen AI is a tool. I think the biggest change in the way this tool works is it is able to solve problems. I think a lot of other tools help people solve problems. I think Gen AI has the capability to actually solve a problem. It's faced with the problem and it'll be like, oh, well, let me solve this problem. And it'll give you an answer. And I think the thing that we have not yet seen is the capacity for it to determine what are the most important problems to solve, right? Because I think like the context of what are the most important problems to solve is something that is so like multimodal and requires so much context of people and the world and emotion and situation that right now isn't available to the app. Maybe we get there with like the multimodal stuff and the meta glasses and everything else, and it really truly understands everything and connect dots in the same way. But for now, I think a human advantage is dot connecting and sort of figuring out what are the things that are most important.
Cool. It's like it'll be fine, by the way. Once we can hear you, the recordings typically are no problem.
And once you settle down into a location where the Wi-Fi's flowing and everything, you look good now. That's good.
Sweet.
You're moving around a lot though.
Yeah. Now I got like a table. I got a table set up here, so I'm good.
Oh, nice, dude. Nice. Okay.
All right. Perfect.
This is actually how every one of Ananth's work calls starts.
Okay, actually, you know what?
Circulating around and trying to figure out.
You know what? To make things a little easier, everyone just smile and laugh at something.
Yeah. Why? We already did that, dude.
We already did that because we need to get the snapshot for the cover image. This is how we do it.
Okay, dude. This is how the sausage is made, dude. So Ananth wanted to see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, it's all just fun, Ananth. We want to have conversations just like this, catch up with people we haven't talked to in a long time that are doing awesome things. And yeah, we couldn't think of a better person to talk about generative AI and the future of work than you. So especially given what you're working on at Indeed. So maybe we can start there a little bit, is like, maybe give us a little bit of background on how you even ended up with this role.
Yeah. I mean, well, so it's really funny, right? Like, first of all, like, huge fan of the pod. I feel like I text Arvind all the time. I'm like, dude, this is so fun. I love that you guys are doing it. But when I heard the episode you initially did on like AI and jobs, I was like, oh, this is what I think about like every day. I actually think a lot of the things you guys riffed on, like, you got to some conclusions very quickly that I've been noodling on for like a year. So that was pretty cool. But I just figured it'd be fun to kind of like talk about it a little bit more and riff on, like what generative AI means for the future of like work, but also like earning and learning, right? These kind of second order effects or third order effects of society that like, I don't know enough people are thinking about now, right? So yeah, like I ended up in this job actually a little bit randomly. I joined Indeed about 4.5 years ago after exiting my startup that was also in the hiring space. And most of my time in Indeed was focused on like, how do we help people get jobs, right? Like, how do we change the way hiring technology is going to market or working? What new features can we launch or implement? So an extension of what I was doing at Skillist. But, in tech, as in the world, things move quickly, right? And we've constantly been trying to sort of like reorganize and reorient to what the market needs. And last May, we went through another pretty big reorg, and basically a dedicated team was stood up inside of Indeed to handle GenAI acceleration, right? And to think about like, how do we help Indeedians adopt and utilize this new technology for the way that they work? And so like a very different focus area for me, right? It's the first time in a long time I'm not thinking about how hiring happens, but it's still a continuum of like, how do people work? How do people use technology? My boss is someone I've known for a really long time. She was actually one of like the first people to support and invest in my startup Skillist. And then I had recruited her over to Indeed to run Indeed's incubator. And then she was picked to lead this GenAI team. And so it was a really fortuitous thing that kind of like pulled me here. Also a cool way to, I think, like, I would say my role now is not pure play product, right? Like I'm no longer just doing product management. It's a lot of like org management, strategic planning, sort of corp dev in addition to product work. And so I think like cross-functionally, I've done a lot of different things. And so it's a cool way to scratch a lot of different itches.
What was your personal like desire to get into the AI space when you heard the job? Yeah. Did you hear like, hey, this job is opening inside Indeed and I'm going to apply to it?
No. I was heard more like, hey, this is your new job, which is, sometimes how things happen coming out of reorgs. But I was excited about it, right? I think both because of the team I get to work with and like, it really is in many ways, we'll talk about like the most existential question, right? If you've thought a lot about like, how do you help people get jobs? Now there's this meta question of what is a job? Like what is work, right? What does this mean for economic opportunity and mobility? I think it's like a very important and interesting problem to be working on. And I'm not like I know you guys were talking at one point, one episode about like, Arvind being a Luddite, like I'm not a technology frontier adopter typically, actually. And so I don't know that I was as deep into the Gen AI stuff in ChatGPT before I got this job. Like knew it existed, but I wasn't like a frontier user. I was like a casual user. But I think the deeper I've gotten into it, the more you see like certainly the transformative potential.
So, yeah, for me, I would say about a year ago, I decided to just like jump into the world of startups, where I've basically lived my entire career. But you know, at a certain point when I was at Notion, it became really big, and I wanted to get back to the business of helping startups. And over the last year, like it's nearly impossible to be in that world without learning a ton about the new and the next as it relates to artificial intelligence applications. And that's where I feel like I've just been almost like drinking from the fire hose around all the different possibilities that exist out there. And, you know, with the rise of what people are calling agents and business transformations internally at companies. And, you know, there was one of the bigger announcements early on, I would consider it early on. It was like probably almost a year ago at this point, was this large fintech company in Europe called
Klarna, right? Yeah,
it's
the
like
Klarna announcement.
It's like an alternative payment method. Announced that they were going to basically cut a bunch of their staff, and they completely moved to AI for almost like all their support tickets. There's this company out there that I recently learned about, but have been in market for a little while. Notion is in the process of adopting their technology called Decagon. That basically takes.
I've actually done the demo with them. It's really cool.
Yeah, they basically make your customer support process almost entirely AI, and only escalates the most important tickets to people who need to actually look at and do something like a human needs to do. And you know, some crazy like ROI numbers there, like 60-70% more tickets solved, and positive NPS and all this other stuff coming out of companies like that.
So I mean, because I think like, you know, exactly right. And I think especially for the folks that are doing like vertical AI solutions, like in customer service, right? There's probably 80% of contacts that could be solved pretty easily, right? That don't actually need a human intervention if you could get the right answer served up immediately, right? And that's just like that's a great place to apply generative AI, right? And so I think like customer service, some of the sort of front end sales jobs, but then on the other end, like software engineering, right? There's this continuum of like, where is it really leaning in and adding a ton of value? Right now it's more functional, but there's also like the general purpose applications. Like Claude released, or Anthropic released like a report earlier this week or last week. It was called the Anthropic Economic Index, right? Basically they analyzed like how millions of people have been using Claude in the last couple of years, right? And sort of like anonymized it and figured out just like, what are the types of questions being asked? What are the types of conversations being had? What are the skills that Claude is using in these conversations? Who are the types of people that are asking these questions? And I think they've like broken it all down. It's a really interesting report. I could send you guys the summary that I had AI pull together for me on the report too after this. But yeah, like I think prominently like writing and writing adjacent tasks are super common, but also coding super prevalent right now, right? And coding,
it's something crazy like 60% of the output coming out of Claude is like code or something. It was some really large number.
Could I ask like a zoom out question quickly before we get into like the details of how it's affecting things, which is when you approach the problem, so you get this new position, you're kind of trying to think about how it's going to affect work, like foundationally, what were some of the things that you were looking into to think about the ways in which it's going to interact with the future of work and the things that are changing? Like how do you approach it? Because it could affect anything in my mind. So how did you narrow it down?
It's a really good question. And I think even like we've gone through a couple evolutions as a team as we've thought about like how to get things moving, right? But I would say at a super high level, there's like the question of like tooling, right? What tools do people need to get started? And in a big enterprise, it's like, what access to tooling do you need? What permissions? What are sort of the paved paths? How do you get people using it on board and able to feel comfortable, right? Because there's also a bunch of evidence that like in general, people are secret AI users at work, right? So they're not actually logging in with their work IDs, or they're not admitting that they're using AI for work. They're using it personal. So like, how do you actually understand and create the like paved paths so that you can not just monitor, but also like help, right? And figure out how to create safe integrations of your data and all that kind of stuff. There's tooling. I think there's enablement, right? So how do you actually help people learn what they need to know? And again, that's variable like by function, like what's the general purpose knowledge you need to know? when do people know and who needs to know in the company how AI works versus just like what it is and what you can use it for. Right. And what does that look like across, applications for external facing product versus internal, but this bucket of like enablement. And then I think like the place that I've been thinking a little bit more about, and I think this is by far the fuzziest, is like, what does that mean for the future of a company? Right. Like if you were to apply AI in certain ways and certain functions, what does that mean for like how an organization should be structured? What investments you're making in the future, how work might be getting done, how you're actually organizing work getting done across a company. And I think that's by far like the fuzziest. And actually, like a learning for me is I thought we could jump there a lot sooner, earlier, right? And in some ways, you sort of get into that question, and it's such an existential question, and also like a mid to long term question that you need to take a step back to just first ask yourself, like, okay, but what can we do with AI right now to make it valuable? Right? What are the use cases and workflows and point solutions that can be implemented to add value for the business? And there's like a ton of frameworks out there now, but one that I really like that I came across recently is the idea that like applying Gen AI, you can think about one, applying it to unlock efficiency, right? Just like how do you do the things you're doing faster? Two, quality, right? How do you apply it to actually do the things you were doing better than you were doing without it, right? How do you actually get a better output than you could have without Gen AI? And finally, I think you get to this question of transformation. Well, what does it look like? Was it an entirely new way of doing this look like, right? Are you actually even doing the same thing anymore? I mean, I think this is something, Arvind, you referenced on your last spot. I actually listened to it like on my drive here. The like question of like abundance and just like rethinking, right? Like what's even possible. There's like a really prominent AI researcher, digital economy researcher. His name's Eric Brynjolfsson. He's, I think now at Stanford. He was at MIT before. But he's made a point before that, like, in some ways, the idea of the Turing test is like the wrong way to think about it, right? The idea of like AI imitating a human, because it presumes that the limit of AI's ability is being the human, right? Or you sort of like putting AI in the mold of the human, when in reality, there's a lot of other things that AI could be doing or better suited to be doing that humans just can't do, right? Like sort of immediate synthesis of a very disparate collection of information to generate an answer immediately. Like no human could do that. So why don't we think about more of those applications, right? In the same way, like, it's completely acceptable for us to consider that robots might be able to do things humans can't, right? They can fly, they can shoot lasers, they can do, like in sci-fi, right? You conceive of a robot doing a lot of things that humans can't do. But typically when we think of AI,
it's almost like saying a monkey can't walk on two legs, but they can climb a tree. Yep. Something like that. Like they can do something totally different as a species.
Yeah, like why don't we think about AI as like Mewtwo, right? Versus like another person, right? Like it should be this like big giant Pokemon that's psychic and, can fly and whatever else. Like it's just really interesting, right? So anyway, I think to the transformation point, like we don't yet know what this means, right? But also we haven't yet, I don't think there's a lot of great examples, at least in corporate, maybe in startups, of like entirely new ways of work being done, right? I think even the Klarna example is like, and I think some of that might've been marketing too, right? Like it's hard to know how much it was actually like they entirely shifted tasks. But that's like taking existing tasks and finding a new tool to do those tasks versus, is that the right bundle of tasks to be done by a tool, right? Or should you be reassembling them or thinking about new tasks that can be done in entirely different ways because of the tooling you have?
First off, I think we had our first and probably best Pokemon reference with Mewtwo there.
I mean, he's the OG, right?
Mewtwo, baby. But also, I think what you're saying is actually, very true, which is we think of artificial intelligence as, and if I'm summarizing it correctly, what you said is like as replacing humans or replacing different tasks that humans can do. But actually, it's doing things that actually, if you like the fast Arv, like, can you collate like a bunch of research about XYZ? He'll take him like a few days or like a year.
I both cannot and I will not.
Yes.
Like, Arv, figure out how to do SEO. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's a good framework to actually think through going forward, just because, it's not just going to be like replacing human tasks. Maybe there's a lot of things out there that we haven't even thought of that it can do that we never imagined we could even do.
Yep.
So,
yeah, and I think, right, like there's the question of like, could a collection of humans do this, right? And I think that is where a lot of people are thinking right now is like, okay, what can AI do that a collection of humans can do now? And either we're getting to the output of the collection of humans faster, right? Or more cheaply or better. But I think to your point, right? Maybe there are even things that like collections of humans could not do, right? And what is it that an AI could do that even a group of humans with specialized tasks could not do? Like, what does that look like?
But can I ask you the flip side of the question?
Yeah.
which is just, when I'm thinking about a company like Indeed, my thought when I think about that company is actually, I'm trying to empower the people to find the best jobs in a way, and also trying to find the high, like, so I actually would love to think about it from the perspective of, are there things after you've looked at this that AI is not going to be better at humans at? Like, it's a different species, and it's going to be better at, like, I was just like, it's better at climbing the trees, but we're better at walking. Or in your mind, in looking at this, is this like a wasteland of protection, and this thing is going to be both better than us at everything and also can do a lot of things we could never do?
I mean, I think, like, again, it depends on who you're reading or listening to, right? Like, there's a lot of perspectives on AGI and what it means and how quickly it arrives. I think first I'll give you like sort of the what Indeed knows now, and also like my own perspective on this, right? Is like, and a lot of the research, again, from Brynjolfsson, also from some research that Indeed did, and our CEO Chris Himes and Eric actually gave a talk at Davos like not that long ago about AI and skills and work, right? I think all the evidence today suggests, like, by and large, we're looking at task augmentation rather than like job automation, right? With AI, right? So like, AI can do specific tasks very well today, right? And there's jobs in which like a lot of those tasks show up, and jobs in which like not that many of the jobs show up, right? So like purely digital jobs that like a mid-level software engineering job, like a lot of the tasks actually can be done with the help of AI, right? It's not going to do the job entirely, right? There's still people who need to be involved at certain nodes, and there's different models of the AI coding. There's like the Devin, right? More of an autonomous agent versus like a Copilot or a Cody or something. But you can get a lot of leverage, right? And so maybe there's like, I don't know, 50%, 80% task augmentation. And so if you think about like the number of engineers you might need to do a specific thing, like that's one way to think about it, right? Is, okay, you can go a lot faster. There's other places where the tasks themselves, just like GenAI is not suited to do, at least in its current form, right? Like childcare, right? Or things like that, right? That are actually like physical world presence, right? You maybe some portion, like probably a nanny or a childcare assistant could be aided by GenAI, right? Like, and 10% of the tasks that they're dealing with, right? It's like, how do I think about dealing with the situation with the kid? Maybe they would really be aided by having an assistant that they could, talk to or something and like get some help. And so some of their tasks could also be aided, but you're not nearly looking at the same level of sort of like augmentation or replacement today, right? So I think that's the, like, where we are today is the perspective is like tasks, right? It sort of depends on like debundling jobs and functions and organizations into the tasks that need to be done. And it's like, all right, where could you go faster today, right? And then where do we sort of reorganize things? I think when it comes to like where do capabilities evolve, hard to say, right? Like I was listening to a podcast recently where Sam Altman was talking to Adam Grant, who, I don't know if you guys know Adam Grant. He's like an organizational psychologist he's done a bunch of stuff. He wrote Give and Take. It was really popular, I think like 10 years ago, and a bunch of other books. But he has a podcast I like listening to. It's called Work Life. But Sam Altman was talking to Adam Grant about essentially like, what is the future of work and humanity, right? If we get to AGI. Because his perspective.
Wait, so Sam Altman was asking him that question?
No, I mean,
feels
they were
like
both
it should be the other way
I think
around.
Adam Grant was talking to Sam, right? But Sam Altman, the perspective he expressed is that like in a couple of years, right, and maybe it's 5 years, whenever we get to AGI, like AI will be better than humans at basically every non-physical world skill, right? And so even things like, I don't know, empathy, there's actually a lot of research out there that like, if people are talking to an AI chatbot versus a human and they don't know it's an AI, they actually think it's more empathetic than the human until they get revealed later that it's an AI, right? So like there's a world in which potentially all these skills that we think of as like human skills there's, one way to think about it is competition in the market, right? And there's now an abundance of these skills out there. But Sam said two things that I thought it was funny. The podcast ended with Adam Grant being like, okay, Sam, you're actually more pro-human than I thought you were, right? And they both got a good laugh out of that. I think one is like the sort of value of human connection and community, and like the value that humans will place on things being done by other humans, right? Because it's not just about sort of the task itself. It's about the like wrapper of the task and or the context of the task and like who's doing it. You might actually want to get, I think there's a subjective question, like, is something not as good in pure output, or is it actually better for you because it came from a person versus a tool? Like, I think we'll need to figure out what is the sort of like new world economy and what do we place value on? What does that look like? I think the other thing is like, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about. GenAI is a tool. Like, I think the biggest change in the way this tool works is like, it is able to solve problems, right? I think a lot of other tools help people solve problems. right? I think GenAI has the capability to actually solve a problem. It's faced with the problem and it'll be like, oh, well, let me solve this problem, and it'll give you an answer, right? And I think the thing that we have not yet seen is the capacity for it to determine what are the most important problems to solve, right? Because I think like the context of what are the most important problems to solve is something that is so like multimodal, right? And requires so much context of like people and the world and emotion and situation that right now isn't available to the AI, right? And maybe we get there with like the multimodal stuff and the meta glasses and everything else, and it's like, oh, it really truly understands everything and connect dots in the same way. But for now, I think a human advantage is like dot connecting, right? And sort of figuring out what are the things that are most important to go solve or to go after.
Also, there's like something that I just thought of as you were saying that is there's gonna be a resistance to allowing AI to take a leadership position and draw lines in the sand, right? Because AI could say, this is the discrete list of problems that we have stack ranked in what I think or what AI thinks is the right way to do it. But it can't say, and that's what we're going to do. Because there has to be a human or a leader who says, this is what we're doing. You're either on board or you're not. I think like AI can actually stack rank and tell you what it thinks, optimizing for whatever set of parameters you give it, what you should do. It can tell you that, but it doesn't have the agency today to say, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, it does have the agency to say that to another set of agents that are working with it, right? So like, you could think about sort of like there's a tree of AI agents, right? And like there's the node at the middle, and they are the supervisor. They are actually doing exactly that, right? And they're saying, here are the things we're going to go do. But I agree with you when we think about the sort of like interplay of humans and AI at work and what that organizational structure looks like. Like absolutely, we're still going to
because like
people, right?
this happens with humans. Like CEOs will have an AMA and people will be like, oh well, I don't think you're doing it right, or I don't think we're prioritizing the right things. And then there's an agree to disagree, and here's you still got to disagree and commit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, on two levels, I kind of feel like one is that I don't actually think humans are that good at deciding what to do either. Like I think we've for decades delayed action on climate change, for example, or the debt, and we have just not prioritize things that we should be prioritizing. So I'm not even sure that that's like a human advantage. But the second thing, I'm like, I've heard crazy projections about how humanoid robots are going to be prevalent within homes and offices in the next 10 years. Like, I think Elon predicted it was going to be like 50% within homes in the next 10 years or something like that.
Yeah. And I mean,
everyone would have a humanoid robot.
He gives aggressive projections, right? But yeah, I don't think it's like far afield.
Let's say it's even 20%. Yeah. Let's say it's 10%. I don't know. Let's say there's some number of humanoid robots that have, you said kind of maybe it's in the next 5 years that we have AGI, which is a crazy thing even to just think about. So you have AGI in physical systems that have humanoid shapes. I don't see why you couldn't start to see action taken based on reasoning on what to do within this is very much like Asimov territory. Like, what are the things it can't do? That's what you're starting to ask. What are the restrictions on this thing?
Right. And
more than what can it do? It's like, what is it not allowed to do?
Well, there's more and more movement away from regulation of what AI can't do, right? Like the deep trend in the last like year has been like, let's go faster, right? And that's like the labs have all been like sort of like disinvesting in their safety teams. The like now a lot of the regulation is moving towards deregulation, right? And so like, I don't know, right? Like it's hard for us to know what any of the right answers are, where this is all playing out in real time. But like that's definitely the direction is like, let's develop stuff and figure it out as we go, as opposed to like, let's set up a bunch of guardrails and, and that's also like, I think it's not an unreasonable strategic decision when you consider we're in like a multi-country environment here, right? And like China's developing their own AI, and this is not like a single player game. And so I think there's a lot of factors to consider, but yeah, like we have no idea how it's going to play out. And I think actually like, looking at time, like I would love to maybe touch on some like two other things here, right? I think one is like I don't think we actually know what this is going to look like at work for the next little bit, but it's going to be meaningful, right? And so I think like the question then is like, what does that mean for society? And not like and I think tactically, like what does that mean for like how people make money, right? And like how people are educated? Because I think about both those questions a lot, right? Like one from the like economic mobility and opportunity question, like how are people going to earn money in the future? And two, like what are people learning, right? Like, what are our kids going to learn? Like, what's important? And then if we have time, like, I would love to, this is like disconnected, but it's like something I think about a lot. Like what is important to humans, right? And like what is meaningful. This is a very heavy existential topic. Like it's very existential and like, oh, holy crap, like what kind of world are we living in? I've actually found myself like leaning in some ways into the things that are like objectively less meaningful, but are still carry a lot of meaning. And in my case, that's like sports. I'm like thinking a lot these days about just like what will the world, what is the importance of things that like continue to give people meaning and satisfaction in a world in which like there are so many things that are going to become like hyper personalized and hyper sort of withdrawn. What are the sort of unifying cultural things that still exist, and how do we continue to invest in those as well so we have community?
Yeah,
maybe
I would
maybe
love
we
to.
could. Yeah, go ahead.
Go for it. No, you go.
Okay, yeah, maybe we could talk about like more related to your. Maybe we could ground it more in a little bit of reality before we jump into the what's out there and that sort of thing, which is for you today in your role at Indeed, what are you seeing people what ways are you helping people leverage Gen AI?
Yeah,
because I think that's one of the things that you're tasked with doing is that. So maybe you could give us a little sneak peek or a little bit view into the shop of Indeed of what you guys are working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the simplest level, it's like there's a combination of like sort of bottoms up, right? Like find the people who are already super users, right? The people who have found ways to unlock a ton of value in their individual day-to-day life from Gen AI, right? And found a way to bring that into work, right? Because this is like absolutely true. Not just Indeed, I would wager at like all big companies. Like the consumer market is leading the enterprise market, right? Like people got way ahead of what they could do with ChatGPT and other tools way before companies have figured this out. And so there are like, I'm sure at your companies or, Arvit, your company, and Vivek at all the companies you're talking to, right? Especially smaller companies, like people have already figured out how to unlock massive productivity gains in parts of their lives, right? And so,
yeah, I mean, this is a trend of our, I think, millennial generation, and continues on to the younger generations as well. Because I remember one of my first jobs out of school, I worked at a company called Box. And at that time, it was the technological revolution was the cloud. And the big problem that companies had is that while people are bringing their cloud tools that they use for their day-to-day life, like storing their music or storing their photos, they're bringing that to the office. And now we have all of our potentially sensitive enterprise content going into this ether that we don't know where it's going. So history tends to repeat itself, right? Like now the same trend is happening with AI, where people are discovering things. Maybe they started off just checking out ChatGPT because it went viral, and then they found some really useful things it could do. And lo and behold, there's now 50 other different models out there and specific use cases and things like that. Like, and they're figuring out ways to do important work with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's history repeating itself.
Yeah. And so I think like one part of what we're trying to do, right, is figure out, okay, like, and this is, I think like you need to go deep enough to understand workflows and functions, but like who are the people in the sales function, in the marketing function who have like done something really cool and achieved a ton of value for themselves, right? Then like there's a question of, okay, is that unique to that person because of like their specific workflow role, et cetera, or can it be abstracted, right? If it can be abstracted, how do we like make that solution available to the masses with less friction, right? And maybe that's like, it's cool. A lot of the enterprise AI tools that exist now, there's like workflow repeatability, right? So you can actually like create a custom prompt or an app or a workflow and like share it with the rest of the company, right? Whether that's within Glean or Gemini or other places, right? So you can be like, okay, well, Bob over here found this really cool way to take 4 disparate pieces of his workflow and turn into this thing that just is doing like work for him and saving him an hour every week, right? What if we gave that to every other person in his function? And first we've like QC'd it, made sure it makes sense and it's not hallucinating and it's like sort of a safe thing, but like, let's go do that, right? And so I think like part of it is like, let's meet people where they're at, the sort of explorers, and find ways to help them unlock value for the rest of the org. Then there's this like broader top-down piece of like, okay, well, if we are meeting with like leadership in a given function, right, or the sort of like directors, managers, et cetera, like where are they is identifying common pain points across their team or their organization, right? What's like a big bottleneck? What is a really, going back to the framework we discussed, what is the thing that is either really inefficient today or like low quality today, right? Do we believe there's a reason that GenAI could help do this better or faster? If so, let's like spend some time piloting what an alternative workflow solution looks like, right? Sort of compare it to the way that work is done today, and then think about what a rollout looks like.
Do you find yourself internally more pushing or getting pulled in?
A mix of both. It like really depends on like the function, the leader, like the competitive landscape, if you will, right? Like what already exists today, what tools are they already using, right? Because also now it's interesting, like there's a lot of tools and systems that people are baked into using, right? And each of those tools are already starting to release a bunch of GenAI features, right? And so like there's just a lot of noise. There's a ton of noise in the market for like, how do I do something? And in some ways, like it's so much easier for startups and small companies to just like get going because there isn't the organizational debt or the systems debt or the tech debt or the workflow debt. They can just be like, all right, let's go. Let's do something new. And like I think something it's hard when you're at a big company to get an ear to the ground on like how that all looks, right? And so you kind of have to like, I feel like one thing I'm trying to do is make sure I am staying aware of how more nimble organizations are still doing things, right? Like what does a better or newer workflow look like? And is it translatable to a big company like ours?
Do you get access into like, okay, we have an enterprise instance of ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you all are using, Glean. Can you like go and see who are the users and then like be like, hey, you're a power user of Glean, like we should talk.
Yeah.
Is that how you're kind of following up with
so
people?
I think exactly
or
part of it is like the sort of data on usage, right? And all opt-in, obviously people are like, yeah, we're cool with you reaching out to us and sort of observing behavior, et cetera. There's a part of it that's like surveys, right? Like put your hand up if you found something really cool and you want to talk about it. Right. I think it's an all-in situation. I think we're just like on the frontier and we're trying to learn as much as we can as quickly as we can.
Yeah, but to your point about small companies, it could get quite draconian at large companies, because if you're competing against much nimbler players who can do effectively what you're doing with almost no staff, you have to start thinking about, should we be 1,000-person company or a 5,000-person company? And I mean, this is where I did want to ask you about the kids thing, because when you're thinking about what your kids should study or what careers they should go into, and this is getting back to maybe the question I asked in the beginning, which is like, what's safe?
Yeah.
To me, it feels like, I mean, I also think about this for kids, right? It's like, it feels impossible to think about it on the 20-year or 30-year time horizon for what could it be. So to me, it's almost like, I want my kids to be happy. I want them to be self-confident. I want them to be creative. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I'm not thinking specifically about any career or anything. It's more like, I want you to become a good, healthy, happy person. And that's where I've kind of narrowed back to. Is that?
I think so too, right? Yeah, I think it's like healthy, happy, like curious, right? Like resilient. But I think like one, and I think, again, our CEO, Chris, like said this in this talk at Davos. He was like, look, I think from my perspective, the most important skill for employability in the future is going to be adaptability, right? Like, can you navigate change, right? Can you sort of learn quickly? And I think it's that combination of like sort of adaptability, curiosity, and resilience, right? It's sort of like knowing that things are going to be changing very quickly, like being hungry to learn and sort of like figure out both what is and what can be possible. And then like, sort of like accepting that, I don't know, the winds are going to change very quickly. But I agree. It's like extremely hard to predict, like what does the future look like, or what is a like investable career or major or anything like that.
Solving problems, being empathetic. Like for me, it's like being able to solve problems, being empathetic, like prioritizing some level of fitness and activity. Like those things are not going to go away for humans, right?
And I think this gets to the like sort of, if you are able to, like I think in the lens of solving problems, if you're able to like be curious, like see patterns, sort of like understand what is important, like I think our kids are going to grow up with like an abundance of ability to solve problems, right? Like they are going to have the most powerful tools at their fingertips. And so I think it's a question of, like, okay, well, what do we want to do with this, right? And what are the things that are important, right? Valuable to society, valuable economically, sort of interesting, right? Like I think because there is like I feel like so much people are going to be able to do. It's a question of like, what does that turn into, right? And what is, I think, economically valuable? Like, how are people going to be able to make money? And I think we're all extremely fortunate that we have like, one, financial security for ourselves, and we'll probably have some measure of it for our families. But like, if you think about this at a societal level, like how do we make sure that there's not, massive societal unrest, right? Or like, what are the downstream effects of the kind of like wealth dislocation that could exist, or the inability to access wealth or opportunity? Like, I think people need to be prioritizing those problems, right? And I don't think like government is a good solve for that problem. I think nothing we've seen in the last like 30 to 40 years suggests that like addressing income inequality is a priority for government. And I don't think that's like a priority anytime soon. Right. And so then the question becomes like, how is there an economic, not even a moral imperative, but like an economic and societal imperative to make sure that like people can earn, right? And that people have the
I
ability
think
to
one
earn.
of the big failures of the United States, but other other countries have done it a lot better, is job retraining, right? And we had a huge drain in the manufacturing sector going to China and other places around the world. And we did an excellent and very efficient job of moving those jobs away. But we did a terrible job of figuring out what are these people who were doing those jobs before, what are they going to do next, and what should they prioritize?
Yeah.
Whereas I believe there are examples of other countries like Germany
Yeah.
where
Germany does
they
apprenticeships.
they do apprenticeships. They'd have other ways that people can get trained or retrained into useful jobs to earn. And
Yeah.
that's not. I mean, our government has proven they're not either willing to or aren't able to kind of prioritize or do that. But I do think there are going to be really, really strong private ways to do that are not government oriented.
Yeah.
Like
I
even
mean,
today, like you can go to even
me,
today you
that
can
even
go
feels
to
that feels too short-sighted.
yeah,
to me.
I agree.
That
Right.
job
So,
retraining point, like, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I think that would have been the answer for the last X number of years. And there's a ton of like nonprofits and actually corporate like attempts at sort of like retraining and upskilling and things like that. But yeah, it's really hard to do at scale, and it's a multi-systems problem, right? It's like, how are you connecting our education systems, our employment systems, our like social safety net systems, like everything. But I agree with Art. If I were trying to solve this problem right now, it wouldn't be about like how do we get more people retrained. I actually think the question looks more like, because I think you said this on the last pod, and I agree with it. I do think it is less likely that there are as many corporate jobs in the future. Like, I think just assuming that corporations can do, uh, more efficiently, right? And like Meta said this outright, a bunch of other companies have too. I think it's likely that they're going to focus on pushing the envelope on that, right, and figuring out how much more they can do without needing to hire much more significantly. At the same time, people are going to have these tools to like do amazing things, right? And I think we already saw a little bit of the like, okay, well, the creator economy, the influencer economy from a media perspective, but I think now it's also like it's easier than ever to build, right? And like when I was starting Skillist, I'm non-technical, but we built the first version of Skillist on Bubble, right? It was like a no-code platform, right? But now you can just like it is even easier to build really functional things. Like one of the side projects I'm trying to do now is like, can I build an app soup to nuts? Like, I don't know how to code, right? But can I get in it with, a Replit or something else and sort of like build a side project just to show that I can, but also to understand like what that looks like, right? And I think in the digital world that's happening now, with agents, it's going to be even easier, right? You could have a person hiring a set of agents to go do a thing and start an online business, right? And maybe in the physical world it gets there too, but like I think people will have the ability to start businesses more easily than ever, provided they have a good idea, right? And like if they're like, okay, well, here's what this idea solves, here's why people would pay me for it, here is, what's good for like it. I think the barrier to entry on starting something is going to be lower than ever. I think the question becomes like, one, how do people have access to capital to start something, right? Or the sort of safety net they need to start something. And two, if right now in the United States, like our systems are so set up that like your access to health insurance, your access to savings, your access to retirement is tied to your corporate employment. And we're expecting that a lot more people are not going to be on that path. How do we, and we don't expect that government is going to solve this problem for people. How do we create systems there, right? And like maybe there's lessons to be learned from like microfinance and what's been done in developing countries, right? Like Kiva and stuff. Like how do you give a woman in India who wants to start a textiles business a loan so that she can go do that and create a system for that? But like I think the safety net thing is really important. Like I do think there's a world in which we get to an abundance of like people going out and doing stuff, really amazing things. But I think like without solving some of those problems, it's like it's just hard to know how we navigate it. And that's like something I've been doodling on a lot.
Yeah, that's really well said.
I also think that when you were talking about that, I was sort of envisioning in my mind, like in the future, there could be a world where, there's a lot, since people have the tools to do a lot more than they could before. There's just a faster iteration cycle, right? You don't need like $1 million and a year to build anything anymore.
Yep.
Right? You need like 2 weeks and like some level of proficiency in figuring out how to get some early signal.
Yep.
And maybe the capital markets become more free flowing in that way, and give smaller amounts out, and more people are involved, right? Like more people can be angel investors or investors in things, and the cycle is fast, so whether it worked or not within a very short amount of time, and you just shrink everything down.
Maybe it's like a lending club meets AngelList, right? And like actually the liquidities. Like the thing is though, there's still so much capital, right? This is the other thing. There's so much like concentration of privately held capital that wants to be deployed. Like I certainly think it could come from all of us being angels, but like also there's so much money that people want to put to work. And I think right now the vehicles have oriented towards, well, let's put these into sort of like bigger and bigger investments, right? That will give us the giant return. And I think that's likely still continue to be the model because of power law and everything else. But I do think you're right, Vivek. Like if there's a way to think about for the reason that is a combination of sort of economic upside and social stability, right? We need to find a way to enable everyone to work. And I just like, I'm extremely skeptical that UBI is ever going to become a thing. Like I don't think it shouldn't be, right? I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about like the fact that economically valuable work will be harder to come by. And maybe that's a dramatic way to phrase it. But like
there's just such a strong reaction. There's just such a strong reaction to any sort of socialist policy in this country that I think it would be very difficult and infeasible to get it done in the US. But I think across the globe you're gonna see it, I think. And maybe there's a competitive.
I don't know if any government has.
Well, you're seeing other markets around the globe that do better than us at having safety nets for their people.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll thrive in this future. I mean, I personally think we're almost at, like in my head, the vision I'm having is there's like the earth is parting, and there's some people that are on the side where they have some social safety net and security, financial security, and they're probably going to do better and better and better as the earth splits and they're on that side of things. And if you happen to be on the side where you don't have it at the moment and you suddenly get displaced from your job at a fast food chain or something, and there's no replaceable job for you, and you don't have the safety net to go start something, and that starting something takes time. And with Skillist, and we've seen it with the podcast, right? It's not a company for us, but it's just a private thing. It takes time to get traction. It takes time to even turn that traction into money. I don't think people are going to have the time to sit there and take that time and try to get big, right? And then, so for me, it's like incumbent. If you don't do it on this governmental scale, like, I think you're going to have unrest. So then what do you respond to that with?
Yeah, I mean, look, right? Like there's so much there, right? And I think I don't have confidence that government will act, right? And like I don't think we can depend on that, right? And I think, and maybe part of this is also like, I mean, even with Skillist, right? There was like a theme of like social entrepreneurship. Like, how do you use private entities to solve social problems? Partially because like government is not always the best at doing it, even if they should be. But I think there has to be like an economic argument for like the future you're describing is very bad for everyone, right? It's bad for capital markets. It's bad for people. It's bad for the haves. It's bad for the have-nots, right? But yeah, how do we avoid getting there? I think the thing that like I'm not. Maybe this is like naively optimistic, and I oscillate, but like I think it's hard to know how we get to sort of that Elysium state of the future, right? Where there's like, have you guys seen that movie with Matt Damon?
Yeah.
Right. There's
maybe
isn't that kind of a dystopian? That's a dystopian.
Well, so that's like literally that's what you're describing, but instead of like the haves and the have-nots, it's literally like instead of on Earth, there's another planet, right? That is where the haves are, and then there's like the have-nots on another planet. I think like
Elon's gonna take all the rich people to Mars, right?
Maybe. But like I do think this gets to the idea of like community. In some ways, like AI, I feel like has a potential to be a great unifier of humankind, right? Like I think in some ways you're like, okay, well actually we're all in this together, right? And this is like the kumbaya bit, but like how do we as humans find meaning and purpose and like realize that like if we don't figure out how to solve this, and it's not just about sort of productivity and capital capture, like we're pretty screwed. right? I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's in everyone's
I
best
think
interest
many
to figure it out,
people
right? Like,
in the short term, I think people are just gonna. I mean, there's going to be a large swath of people who are displaced, but there's going to be also a number of people who just evolve and learn how to use the new tech to do their jobs better and get 10x returns,
yeah, I mean,
right?
the staggering of the displacement is also really interesting, right? Like, I think, and I can't remember who said this. It might have been on the All In podcast where like Jason Braver was interviewing Ray Dalio, right? But essentially, like, because of the waves of job displacement that are coming from Gen AI, and because it's starting in the middle, right? It's starting with middle wage work and not low wage work. It almost like lights a fire under the haves to figure out what to do in a way that it wouldn't if it were just like if AI had progressed in the way that maybe we all thought 10 years ago, and I was like, oh well, all the labor intensive jobs are gone and all the knowledge work jobs are here. I think then you get to a very dystopian future because you're like, oh cool, well yeah, they don't have jobs, sorry, but I got mine, I'm fine, right? I think in this case, if it's like, oh well, a bunch of software engineers can't find jobs, a bunch of like salespeople or marketers can't find jobs, a bunch of strategy consultants are no longer needed, right? It's like, oh well, what do we do? How do we create a system in which we can, if we can't find jobs in this corporate system, how do we create another on ramp? I think like, hopefully it doesn't take mass job dislocation for people to think about it, but I do think the sequencing of it is helpful. Like I think a lot
Yeah.
about my own economic mortality, right? Like how much longer do I have to earn in this track, right? And therefore, what should I be thinking about in terms of other ways to make myself economically viable?
And what are you thinking about right now? Like what are some other things you're working on?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I don't know that I figured it out yet, right? But I do think like I have a couple high level theses I've written up on a whiteboard at home, right? One is I think like things in the physical world will become more valuable, partially because like the digital world is going to get commoditized, but and partially because like there's going to be capital to spend, and I think people will put it into the physical world. And so I need to figure out like exactly what that looks like, right? Does that look like infrastructure, or does that look like entertainment, right? Does that look like experiences? But I think like the idea that like I mean, we grew up in the valley, right? Like a lot of us are can only do things in the digital world, right? I don't have a lot of physical world skills, right? In like the sense of building things, but where can I add value, right? And where can I create things for people? So I think that's one thing. I think another is like this idea of like community. I think community is very valuable and going to be increasingly valuable and important. And so to the extent that like there is a way to um, help people create community, like a real community, I think that's valuable and important. Um, and then I think like the sort of merging of that for me is this idea of like, oh well, I want to do more in sports. Like it is truly the thing that I like. It was my first love, right? Like we all grew up together, right? We've been in like a fantasy league, or we were in a fantasy league for like 20 years, right? Like the thing I wanted to do when I was a kid was like I wanted to be like on ESPN, right? Or I wanted to be a GM of a franchise. And somewhere along the way, like I was like, actually, that's not like that meaningful of a job. Like I want to do something that's helping the world, and found this like access to opportunity thing, and I really care about it. I want to keep doing it, but like part of me now is like I really want to get back to that too. And it doesn't, maybe it doesn't have like meaning in the sense of like it is doing something with social utility in sort of like a sustainability sense, right? It's not saving the planet, but it is meaningful. It is tremendously meaningful to a lot of people. Like I've experienced this personally, right? But also a lot of people, you just talk to them, you're like, yeah, like the best part of my day is watching Steph Curry play basketball, right? Like the thing that made me the happiest coming out of COVID is when the NBA came back, right? And like there's this has meaning, right? And so I feel like that's something I've been like leaning back into a little bit more.
Yeah, I can totally see the world moving towards more entertainment related stuff being what people really spend their time on, because there's going to be this abundance of time, honestly, that's going to come back to people to just do things. And if there's one thing we know, people don't just sit quietly in a room. Like
Yeah.
people want to do things, people want to, and another thing that you said that actually made me got me thinking is the physical world. Um, Going through COVID, I think we all moved to this world of being remote and being like, especially the people who have these like behind a desk, behind a computer type of a job, like got very comfortable and used to being behind a desk and behind a computer and sitting in their own room in their house. But there's now going to be a premium placed on people coming into the office, because if I can just ship work to an AI to do with a chat or with prompting, like the real value of having a human being work on something is that they're right there. I can tell them what I want. I can whiteboard with them. I can talk to them. I can go for a walk. There's all these like aspects of physically being there that they're intangibles that are, I think companies are starting to realize there's a real big value in. And so I think that's another part that I think we'll see kind of go back to what we had before. Like it's hard to think of now because of where a lot of our jobs have been, but think back to like 2018, 2019. We were all going into the office every day.
Yeah. The funny thing is, actually, I feel like it
wasn't really a question.
Well, so I was working on Skillist then, and we were a remote first startup, right? And so I actually was working from my living room like 4 weeks at a time, and then every 6th week or every 4th week, I would be flying out with my team, and we'd all be in a conference room in a co-working space, for a week.
So you guys were built in that same vein, interestingly.
Yeah. But like I needed other sources of community, right? And like we were on cycle time, but like I was in the Bay, and I would be like going to Cal games every weekend, right? And like that's where I would see my friends and sort of like have a sense of like, oh, I'm a part of something, right? And so I think the work thing is really interesting, and I mean also what's really interesting with digital work is like we're probably not that far from like you could have a Vivek avatar, right? That's just like on Zoom, literally answering questions for you, right? Like, and again, like I think like what is the most important thing? Is it that you're physically there? Is it the work's getting done, or you're finding a way to get the work done? I don't know that like RTO for RTO's sake makes sense, and I do think like companies need to get tighter about articulating why they are adamant about RTO. But I think there's value, right? Like I think part of the blanket RTOs now are like, how do we find ways to sort of get leaner, right? That's like the cynical view. And part of it is how do we actually get really crisp about the things we want people to achieve when they are physically together, right? Let's make sure those things are happening when we have people in a physical place together, such that the rest of the time we're actually like making amazing use of AI, right? To like work asynchronously or work autonomously or get a bunch of things done when people are sleeping in the night and stuff like that. Like, I don't know that companies have figured that out yet.
I mean, I can only speak for myself on this and how it feels, but I don't even have to have a goal when I go into the office. It's just different. The energy's better. I'm seeing someone at the kitchen counter. I talk to them for 5 minutes. I'm much more connected to my team. You don't have to give me that these are the 3 things you need to achieve in person. This is what you need to do. It's like I just feel more energy.
But that might even be the goal, right? The goal might literally be like we want, like there to be, and it's not the company has to, I don't think the company has to say it necessarily, right? They don't need to say like, hey, Arvind, we want you to come in for this reason. I just think, and again, I'm not in the room where all these companies are deciding about RTO or not, but like I think there should be clarity around like why it's important when leadership is making.
Yeah, and I should say that the funny thing is, I would never have the job I have right now if it was fully in person. It's just impossible. Like the way the office is located, the way I'm located, and the way the farm is located, it wouldn't be possible. So it's both better for me when I'm in the office and impossible for me to be in the position if I was all the time in the office. That's the hard trade-off. It's like, how do you get the right people into the right roles when those two things, I do think they're mismatched slightly. But I mean, to me, also going back to what you said earlier about sports, like I believe that you should follow your passion here and it'll figure itself out by doing that. And you've had that interest for so long that I think that an interesting business will come of that. You may not know exactly what it is at the moment, but to have that level of instinct and to have had it for so long, I do think is worth following.
Yeah, I mean,
how do you predict it'll manifest? Like, what are you thinking of doing?
Yeah, well, so I have a couple ideas right now, like side projects I'm cooking. I think one is, like I mentioned, I'm trying to build an app, and at this point, it's like not a business. It's just like I want to prove that I can do it, but super high level conceptually, like I think the way that coaches get hired makes no sense, and so I want to build something to prove it. Like, and there's a lot of reasons why I think it's like an interesting market and a good thing to do. But like, first, I just want to see if I can build the app. Otherwise, if I can't build the app, I'll like probably work with someone to help me build the app and just like validate that my idea is good, right? But like theoretically, you should be able to say like, hey, Kyle Shanahan is looking for a new defensive coordinator, right? We want someone like X, who are like the 15 people who could be really interesting. And I'm more focused on the college market. I think like there's a bigger market and there's a much wider distribution of talent. But anyway, I think that's one idea. And it sort of combines, again, expertise in like online labor marketplaces with something that I think about all the time. The other two things are like a little more random. One, I was telling Arv, like I've been talking to my friend Jay, and I think we're going to start a podcast. We actually have a call on Monday. And Arvind, I know you've been trying to get on me to start it sooner, but got derailed with some other side projects.
Whenever it starts.
Yeah. But I think one thing I love about like what you guys do is like, you're not trying to be the acquired guys and like, and I love acquired, but you're not trying to like do an analysis of like what is a job. You're actually just like getting individual people's stories, right? And I think like in this world in which like general knowledge is going to become ubiquitous, right? Sort of like you can generate an analysis of any company very quickly, and then like again, the way they do it is really deep. But like I wouldn't be surprised if not too long in the future they're like asking, you know, ChatGPT deep research to pull an analysis of the last 4 years of Meta on some structure, and then giving it to Google Notebook LLM and just, you know, created the podcast, right? And like all of a sudden their workflow is totally different.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you guys are doing is like you're capturing individual stories and insights that like aren't on the internet or couldn't be generated by a GPT because it's a person's story, right? And so I think similarly with sports, like I don't want to start a sports take podcast. Like I'm not trying to do like an analysis of like the week in college football or in the NBA or in the NFL. I want to actually like talk to people about like their experiences as fans, right? So like, why are you a fan? Why did you become a fan? What does it matter to you? Like, what role does it play in your life? And kind of use that as the narrative for storytelling, right? So almost like a Humans of, you know, type deal, right? Or This American Life for sports fans. Because I think that's just like such a pivotal part of like the experience, right? Like everyone is a sports fan for some reason. It like takes up an insane amount of our time and mind share and money. Like it has to mean something, right? But that's different for a lot of people. And so anyway, I think like that, you know, keep an eye out, hoping to get that going soon, and definitely we'll have you guys on. And then the last thing is like I want to write a book. I want to write a book about Steph Curry, and I have like the idea of it in my head. I need to start outlining it. I've done a lot of like blog level or like longer form writing with Claude, but I haven't done a book, and I want to do a book.
Wow, that's exciting, man. That's super cool,
man.
And actually, the funny thing that you mentioned about, you know, sort of just the podcasts that are just like, here's a history of XYZ, and like there's AI that can already do that.
Yeah.
Like I've seen demos of, and I, you know, there's a few tools out there that I've been testing out that will actually allow you to, in English, prompt, you know, different AI models to go and build out workflows for you.
Yep.
So one of those workflows is like you can go to Google, you can go to, you know, one of the other deep research things, ask it to do a bunch of stuff, and then the output can be, you know, using 11 labs, read out all the content that's been generated by the deep research and do it in the voice of, I don't know, Jack Nicholas, right? Like,
yep.
You can literally do that already.
Yep.
Which is pretty remarkable.
That's crazy, man. Like the guys in the podcast could literally feed their own podcast in, feed their voices in, feed the deep research, and be like, generate a podcast like this for this.
Do you guys listen
10
to the
30
AI Daily
seconds
Brief?
of your voice? No.
There's a podcast called the AI Daily Brief, but he does that, right? So sometimes he'll just be like, and here's the AI version of me talking. My voice is sore. Here's AI me sort of walking through this topic.
Oh my God. I have to listen to that.
Yeah, I'll send this to you afterwards, Arvind. But basically with things like 11 Labs and Cartesia, you can record 10 to 30 seconds of your voice, just 10 to 30 seconds of your voice, and it can read anything in your voice. It's remarkable.
Amazing, dude. Crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm not ready for the world. I'm not ready for the next stage here.
Again, the more you think about it, right, the sort of heavier it gets. And I think like in some ways, like I think part of the reason I am like more aggressively pursuing side projects in sports is to like, it's not a left brain, right brain thing, but I think it like keeps me grounded, right, from what my day job is, which is like, in some ways it gets me to like, where are we going, right? Like, I think there's an optimistic version of the world where you're like, yeah, everything is abundant. And I talked to someone who works in nonprofits last week, and like, it is really cool to think about, like, you know, nonprofits are trying to solve important problems and are often capital or resource constrained and just like can't solve the problems, and they're dependent on funders, and they need the funders to hire more people. And you're like, oh, well, if you had an abundance of labor, what could you do, right? And so like, I think there's a lot of ways in which you think like, this is going to be amazing, right? We can solve really important problems better, right? So I think that's super exciting. But there's also the world of like, well, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for, you know, like the economy and for the people who are going to lose their jobs, and how do we get to the other side? And nobody has a good answer yet, right? I think it's sort of a build up plane while we're flying.
There's some intuition that you probably also have on this, which is that it's not going to be that fun to watch like a 5-on-5 robots playing basketball.
So this is exactly it, right?
Right?
Yeah, I think sports is cool because like, I do think you're exactly right. I think it is going to remain, I mean, who knows, right? Maybe not, but I think it's going to remain like human-centered, and it is unifying and real, right? The thing is, if you think about like entertainment, right? Like and I could be wrong on this. My perspective is things like streaming TV, streaming movies, it's going to become hyper personalized. Like, I actually don't know how many common experiences are going to remain existing, because like people will be able to say, well, I want to watch a show about this, and it'll just generate, right, a really engrossing series that is like for you, but it is your series, right? And so like, I'm not going to like, it's not like we're going to all be talking about the episode of Game of Thrones the day after. Like maybe there'll be some of that, but a lot of people are going to be even more siloed on entertainment. But sports is going to remain, right? Is like, there is a game, right? And we're going to talk about the game after. We're going to be texting about the game. I think like every time there's a Warriors game, I'm like texting, I have like 3 different texts, right? With groups of people. Like, I don't think that goes away, which is exciting.
Yeah. Anyways, it's been a fascinating conversation. I'm excited about just like continue to have these conversations. We should join your podcast whenever y'all started. And, but also, it is definitely something that's quite scary too in some ways. So it's one to look out for.
I guess if I can leave you guys with anything, like I don't know if it helps, but like there's no point in being scared, right? Like we're sort of like, we're gonna go through it. It'll happen. I think we can be thoughtful about like sort of the world we want to end up in, right? But to some extent, we're just like along for the ride, right? And so we'll see how, all of our like parents in prior generations went through massively disruptive things too, right? Like I think one way or another it's going to play out, but I do think it's important to like I appreciate you guys starting some of these conversations, right? Because I think people should be thinking about like what does this look like in a way that's not like a doom and gloom situation, but like, okay, like, what's coming.
We live in an extremely exciting point in history. Whatever you want to say, whatever happens, we live at an incredible time to just observe what's happening.
Yeah, and hopefully shape.
And we have somehow we have the agency and time and other resources to actually observe it, which is amazing. So
yeah. Well, thanks, Ananth.
Hey.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining. Thanks for hitting us up and being a avid commenter and giving us feedback. And
dude,
I'll
buy some merch. Huge fan of the pod.
Dude, we need to have merch. That's a good idea.
That's a good idea. Okay. All right. Next passion project.
All right. See you guys.
All right.
Go Bears.
Bye.